Welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. I know that in most areas of the country it is starting to get chilly, and I'm getting the question often, should I change anything as we go into winter? So I figured we would chat about that this evening. A little bit about digestive function, what requirements your horse has for nutrients and fiber and water. And then the other common question I get when we're talking about coming into winter is weight gain. Either I'm worried about my horse losing weight, I need to put some weight on my horse. So we'll address that as well. So I know it's been a while for some of you for that I haven't gone through the digestive system. And I think especially when we're talking about weight gain and fiber and nutrient requirements, it's really important just to have a rehash of the digestive system. So the teeth are really the first part of the digestive system. You've got to make sure that you get your horse's teeth floated, or in the case of a senior horse, if you see them starting to ball up food or drop food on the ground, then that is an indication that perhaps either they need to get their teeth floated or we've got some permanent dental issues and we might have to completely change the way that we are providing the diet to the horse. Their nutrient requirements don't change, but the way you provide that food to the horse would change. They can no longer consume long stem hay. Harder grains are going to be harder for them to consume or chew up. So we need to look at how we can still provide those nutrients, but in a form in which they can actually get them into their stomach. So the next part of the digestive system is the stomach. It's really small in relation to the rest of the digestive system. This is the first kind of reason why we say we don't like to feed large grain meals to horses, because the size of the stomach is very small. And if we feed a large meal to the horse, it will just flow through the stomach, bypassing some of that digestive process that's going to go on there. I know that we all fear acid and know that it is the primary cause for gastric ulcers in horses, one of the biggest problems we have in horses. But a small amount of acid in the horse's stomach, when the horse is managed correctly, i.e., frequent meals, foraging regularly, that acid is actually an integral part of the digestive system. It breaks down fibers and proteins and fats into their smaller portions so that they can be absorbed in the small intestine. If we completely turn off that acid secretion, we're really turning off the first part of the digestive process, and that can cause a lot of problems later on. If I cut a window in the stomach and let you look inside, there are two distinct regions. The top squamous mucosa, it's that light pink tissue, and there's no protective coating there. The bottom, the glandular mucosa, or that dark pink tissue, you can see in the photograph even, there's a slimy mucus coating on that bottom tissue, and that is what protects that tissue from the acid that is also secreted by little cells down in that dark pink tissue. And stops that acid from actually affecting that tissue. Now, in a perfect world, that acid gets secreted continually, but the horse is also continually chewing and swallowing food. When they're chewing, they're swallowing saliva, which helps to dilute that stomach acid and buffer it because it's got some buffering capabilities. But also when they're swallowing that food, that is also diluting that stomach acid, and it's also forming a mat that sits on top of that stomach acid so that when the horse moves and exercises, that acid doesn't splash up onto that non-protected region. So we're kind of building the story as to why horses are designed to eat small meals and continually throughout the day. They're grazing animals. They're literally meant to graze for about 17 hours out of the day. Then we move to the small intestine. It's about 70 feet in length. It's like a garden hose. It's long. It's not very wide in diameter. There's enzymes that live in the small intestine or are produced in the small intestine that continue to break down carbohydrates, proteins, fats, minerals so that they can be absorbed. When I say carbohydrates, your things like sugars and starches are meant to be broken down and absorbed here in the small intestine by enzymatic digestion. Now, enzymatic digestion does not produce heat as a byproduct. When we get into the hindgut of the horse, we actually see a byproduct of digestion is heat, but our sugars and starches are meant to be digested here in the small intestine. Again, if we're feeding large meals that overload the stomach and then in turn overload the small intestine, we have those nutrients then flowing into the hindgut of the horse where all the microbes live, wreaking havoc. Those sugars and starches are not meant to go in large quantities into the hindgut. So from the small intestine, then we start what we call the hindgut, which is comprised of three primary components: the cecum, the large colon, and the small colon. The cecum, I've got highlighted here in yellow, is a blind sac. It's like a balloon. The entry and exit point is in the same place. Now, I forgot to mention, but the rate of passage, or the time it takes food to pass through the stomach and the small intestine. The stomach, it can be as quick as 15 to 30 minutes, up to an hour. In the small intestine, as short as an hour, up to 3 to 4 hours. So the rate of passage through the stomach and the small intestine are very quick. We don't have a lot of time to mess around in those two regions. But once we get to the hindgut of the horse, we start to see the rate of passage significantly increase. 7 hours to get through the cecum. The hindgut is full of lots of living microorganisms, whether it be bacteria, yeast, fungus, viruses even that confer health benefit to the animal, all kinds of living microorganisms in the hindgut that we call collectively the microbiome. And their primary goal is to ferment fiber. This is where all the fiber is meant to be digested, and it takes a while for that fiber to be digested. So you'll see the rate of passage significantly increases. When we get into the large colon, got it highlighted here in blue, again, 35 to 65 hours rate of passage. It can easily flip on itself. Another byproduct of those bacteria breaking down that fiber or fermenting that fiber is they produce gas, which can fill up in pockets, twist the gut around. So a lot of your colic will occur in what we call the hindgut of the horse. And colic really is just a name for gastrointestinal pain. Babies, when they get gassy, human babies, we call it, they're colicky, right? It's just gas pains or pain in the intestinal tract. In the horse, when they're breaking down and fermenting that fiber, as I mentioned, one of the byproducts is heat. So one of the most important parts of the diet, especially in the wintertime, is fiber. The more fiber they eat, even the stemmier it is, the harder it will be for those fiber to break that bugs to break that down, and they will produce extra heat. So one of the most important things in the wintertime to feed your horse is plenty of fiber, hay. When we get into the small colon, what we're doing is absorbing moisture out of any non-digestible fibrous material that is left over. That then goes into forming fecal balls and being excreted out of the body. So forage, fiber, pasture, hay, fiber in the diet, beet pulp. This is the most important component of the horse's diet. And we know that they need to eat a bare minimum of 1% of their body weight in dry fiber per day. So that equates, hay is pretty much 99%, 98% in some cases. It's very high dry matter content or fiber content. So we usually say at least 10 pounds of hay per day. That is going to keep the gut moving. Most likely they will lose weight, but that is the absolute bare minimum. If I have a horse on a weight loss program, I'm going to do about 1.2% of their current fat body weight. That'll get us to about 1.5% of their ideal body weight. Typical normal intake is between 1.5 to 2.5% of their body weight. So for a 1,000-pound buggy horse or barrel horse, we're looking at about 15 to 25 pounds of hay per day. They're usually not going to eat more than 30 to 35. That's 3 to 3.5% of their body weight. So 30 to 35 pounds for our average 1,000-pound horse per day. But it's absolutely critical, especially as we have smaller pastures, we have snow on the ground, and they're 100% reliant on us for their fiber requirements, that we are providing enough forage to the horse. Now, what happens if you don't provide enough horse? What might be some symptoms in your horse? Um, Colic-like symptoms, gastric ulcers, acidic hindgut, cribbing. They'll start chewing wood, behavioral issues like weaving and aggression because their gut actually hurts because they're not being able to develop swallow saliva, and swallow food that's buffering the stomach acid. So when they don't get enough forage, that typically results in gastric ulcers, which is painful, and then it's just kind of a ripple effect, all the other things that occur. So when we strictly get into winter, we know that horses decrease feed intake in the cold and windy weather because they're seeking shelter. So a lot of our horses have the luxury of stalls or a run-in shed during the winter time, so this isn't as big of a deal. But let's say we've got horses in the wild or horses out in a giant field that don't have shelter. It would be more common, especially when it was really windy, for not only because it's so cold and it's sucking calories out of them just trying to stay warm, but they tend to bunch up in a group, kind of butt to tail or nose to tail, and they're seeking shelter versus trying to eat any food. When we get snow on the ground, greater than about 7 inches, it covers the grass and it decreases any, if you did have pasture or some kind of forage out there that they're eating, that's just dry at that point, it's not growing, but if there was pasture available, you get 7 inches of snow covering it, that significantly decreases the intake of that pasture because it decreases grazing time by about 24%, so about a quarter, and decreases intake by about the same because they're having to pour through that snow to actually get at it. Now, I know that this isn't a common scenario. Most of our horses, either there isn't 7 inches of snow or they're in stalls because we like to put them in a stall and we don't have them out in that snowy environment. But just know that if you did have horses out in the west or out in a kind of open range and there's a lot of snow, and they have to pour through it, that does significantly decrease the amount that they're going to consume. And in cold and windy conditions, horses lose more body heat and burn more energy just to stay warm. So when we all get weather reports, I know weather reports are barely ever right, but if they're predicting drops in temperatures, especially with windy conditions, and our horses are going outside, we do need to make sure that we are providing more calories so that because we know that they're going to burn more energy just to stay warm. So in order to maintain their body weight and not have them lose weight if they're in really windy conditions, we need to make sure that we're providing a little extra. Now, we also don't want to make rapid feeding changes. So if your horse is on more of a forage only diet and you think, oh, I need to give it more calories, so I'm going to go give it some kind of pelleted concentrate, that's not going to work because that's just going to give them diarrhea. So the easiest way to add extra calories at first is to feed more hay. So we know it's going to be cold and windy for the next couple of days, so I'm going to feed more hay leading up to and during that weather event. There's what we call the lower critical temperature. It's a temperature below which they're just their ability to maintain their body weight. That's just by eating normal food and producing metabolic heat, just by digesting food and maintaining their body heat. They can't keep up, right? And so in adult horses, not senior horses, but adult horses, the range for that lower critical temperature is between 18 degrees and 41 degrees. And that's a pretty wide range. The thinner the coat, so we've got like a quarter horse, a halter horse with a thin coat, he's going to have a much higher lower critical temperature, below which we need to put blankets on, feed more in order to maintain his body weight. If there is a big fat old pony that's got a really thick fluffy coat, they may be able to withstand temperatures of 18 degrees Fahrenheit before we have to think about feeding extra to just maintain them. Young horses, the lower critical temperature is actually, it sinks down a little bit, but it's a little bit more narrow in its range. So they can actually withstand colder temperatures because they have more fat layer. Depending on the hair coat, the age, anywhere from 12 degrees Fahrenheit to 32 degrees. For each degree that it goes below that critical temperature that we've determined, I've got a senior horse, he's got a thin coat. I'm going to say his lower critical temperature is 41 degrees. For every degree we go below that, so it's 40 degrees outside, it's 39 degrees outside, it's 38 degrees, it's 36, whatever. Every degree we go below that, we increase their digestible energy requirements in order to just maintain their body temperature and their body weight. If we don't supply additional, they're going to lose weight just trying to stay warm and stay alive. So let's say, as I mentioned, the lower critical temperature for the horse in question is 41 degrees. Senior horse, thin hair coat, show horse. 0 degrees below that, it's 41 degrees. We don't have to increase the calories at all. Let's say it's 31 degrees out. We need to provide at least an extra 2 megacals a day. You're like, well, I don't know what that means. Hay, good quality hay, is about, so an alfalfa, for example, or a second cut orchard, that's good quality, good nutritional value, can run around 1 megacal per pound. So we're looking at adding about 2 extra pounds of hay per day, or 2 extra pounds of a hay pellet. Let's say it's 21 degrees out. It's getting much colder. It's 20 degrees below what we considered that lower critical temperature for this horse. Now we need an extra 4 extra megacals per day. So we want 4 pounds of hay per day. Now, if we've got a really low nutritional value hay, we're again increasing even more hay to meet that energy requirements. I don't expect you to remember any of this or know what your hay is. That's what we are available for. You can contact me. I can help you. The point of showing you this is really just to know that as the temperature goes down, feeding extra hay or concentrate will increase, help them maintain their body weight. I'm assuming everyone can still see my screen. Something weird just happened. If we start to get windy conditions, wind by itself, because wind, when we think about how horses in the summertime will keep themselves cool, it's evaporative cooling. If you put a breeze on a horse, it will help to evaporate any of that heat coming off them, and it'll cool them much quicker. So if it gets really windy outside, we're looking at having to add an additional 4 to 8 pounds of good quality hay per day. If it's raining, the rain immediately squashes down the horse's ability. If it's not wearing a cover or a blanket, it immediately squashes down the hair and stops it from being able to like thermoregulate. So we're looking at increasing the hay by about 6 pounds a day to maintain body weight. If it's raining and windy and you've got a barn, put them in the barn. That's the best thing you can do. But if that's not available, we've got broodmares and foals and they're outside, we're looking at having to add about 10 to 15 pounds of good quality hay per day. We get to a point where you just physically can't add any more hay. They're just not going to eat it. Because this isn't just 10 to 15 pounds a day. This is on top of what they were already eating just to maintain their body weight. Now, because it's rainy and windy, we've got additional caloric requirements to maintain their body weight in wind and rain. So maybe you were already feeding 25 pounds of hay a day to maintain your broodmare, and now I've told you you have to add another 10 to 15 pounds. That's going to get excessive. So that's where you might need to use calories like from oil or a grain concentrate. So I mentioned hair coat, and when the hair coat is either flattened down because it's windy or muddy or they're wet, um, then it's not going to allow them to fluff it up so that they can have this insulative layer. So see this in the picture on the right, there's this red line going from the skin layer down to the hair shaft. That is a muscle, and it's called the piloerector muscle. And that is the thing that pulls on that hair and makes it go up or lets it lay down. Pulled up straight. When it's pulled up straight, between the tip of the hair and the skin layer, and obviously there's lots of hairs, not just one, there an air pocket gets trapped in there and it forms an insulation layer. Um, when the hair is muddy or wet, it flattens down that hair coat and it stops that insulatory layer. Now, I know this is not a favored public opinion, but if you put a cover on a horse, it's also going to flatten down the hair coat so that they cannot do their own have their own insulation from their hair coat. So make sure that if we're putting a cover on a horse in certain temperatures, that it's going to be enough to kind of account for what they would have been able to insulate themselves with their hair coat. And it's not just a thin sheet that is pushing the hair down, but not giving them the temperature regulation support that they need. As I mentioned, wet or muddy hair can reduce its insulating value and increase heat loss. Obviously, the thicker the hair coat, the easier it is to retain more heat. Obviously, in the summertime, same thing. If they got a really thick coat, it's going to be harder for them to dissipate that heat when it gets really, really hot. So, blanketing. I am a nutritionist. I don't claim to be an expert in physiology per se. And you've got to use your own best judgment. You know your horse better than anybody. But I think sometimes we over blanket because we go outside and think it's cold for us. So we think, oh, it must be cold for our horses, and we throw blankets on them. Some of the kind of general rules of thumb: if there's no shelter available during the turnout period and the temperatures get windy, rainy, or drop below 5 degrees Fahrenheit, we're putting a blanket on. Now, I would say if we've determined that that horse is an older horse and we say, okay, that lower critical temperature is much higher than that, then we're going to want to put a blanket on sooner. So, like I said, you judge it better. You know your horse best. If there's a chance the horse will become wet, freezing rain, um, that is a real problem. Snow sounds crazy, but snow is not usually a problem as long as it's not a wet snow, because it will actually form an insulating layer around the horse. But if it's wet rain, ice, freezing rain, or that really wet snow that's going to melt on the horse, then definitely want to put a cover on. Or if it's not putting a cover on, it means this is the time that we should give them shelter or bring them in. If the horse has had their winter coat clipped, if it's really old, a really thin horse, or one that's just not acclimated to the cold. So hay's the most important part, right? To keep your horses warm and provide extra calories and make sure they don't get digestive upset. But this can be really daunting. Like, how much hay do I actually need? I've kind of calculated, and this in itself freaked me out when I calculated that we've, in some areas of the country, got about 5 months of not full-blown winter, but winter slash mud season slash, unpredictable fall, where we need to provide our horses 100% of their fiber requirements because they don't have pasture turnout, we don't want them to ruin the pastures, whatever. So we look at 150 days and we think conservatively we're feeding a horse 1.5% of their body weight. It's a 1,000-pound horse. That's 15 pounds of hay per day over 150 days. That is a little over a ton of hay per horse for that 150 days or 5 months. Most people don't just have one horse. So maybe I've got 2 or 3 horses. We're looking at 3 to 4 tons of hay. It's hard for a lot of people to store that much hay, come by that much hay. So that's where it opens the door for your hay alternatives like hay pellets, forage pellets, chopped hay, bagged forage products that you can substitute in because you can just pop down to the feed store weekly or monthly to pick up additional. You don't have to have the storage and you don't have to outlay the money to kind of have it all sitting there. But then I start to think, okay, fiber is really the most important thing to feed your horse year round. Even more important in the wintertime because it can help them keep them warm, stop them chewing wood and trees and that kind of thing. So if I was able to feed something that would get me a little bit more digestibility out of my hay, that sounds like a good idea. Because I will tell you that even the very, very, very best quality hay is only about 50% digestible. And that's just a natural fact. And if we have stress in the hindgut where those microbes, or old horses where the microbial diversity is less and less, then we have less and less efficiency in digesting that fiber. So if we were able to feed something that would increase our digestive efficiency and break down that fiber better, that would be a game changer. Or well, we do. The DAC digestive feed additive. I recommend every day a horse should eat this product because it's going to help with warding off bad bacteria, pathogenic bacteria. We've now got the GI Pro 3 in it that is also going to help with bad pathogenic bacteria. But the probiotics in it, the yeast sac and the live microbes, they have been scientifically shown to increase fiber digestion and stabilize those good bugs in the hindgut so that we can support fiber digestion. That's huge. So the DDA can really help with fiber digestion, which is the most important thing that you're feeding horses through the wintertime. The other thing that I think we forget about a lot because it's cold, it's not hot. And in the summertime, people think about water intake and they think about electrolytes and how to increase water intake. But I think that we really need to focus on the winter time as well. Um, and a horse will drink about 5 to 15 gallons. Again, we've got a wide range that is normal for an adult horse, 5 to 15 gallons a day. This is where it's really important to know what is normal for your horse. Are they a 5-gallon a day type of horse? Are they a 15-gallon a day type of horse? Both of those are normal, but if the horse that usually consumes 5 gallons a day all of a sudden starts going to 10 or 15, wonder what's going on. If the horse that usually drinks 15 gallons a day goes all of a sudden to 5, yes, it's within the normal range, but it's not normal for that horse. So it's really, really important that you understand how much water your horse normally drinks. Yearlings, 4 to 5 gallons. Now, a lot of people do continue to exercise their horses in the wintertime, and they think, well, I don't see them sweat. So number one, they mustn't be losing electrolytes. And if they're not sweating, they're not losing a lot of hydration in that sweat. Well, I will tell you that the most effective way to dissipate heat is evaporative cooling. And that means you take a wet object and you transfer the heat that heat into a dry environment. That is going to be the best way. Like if you try to dry yourself with a wet towel, it doesn't work, right? Because the purpose of the towel is to wick that moisture away from you. If you think about really humid environments, it's not going to be very easy to suck that heat and moisture off a horse if the air temperature or the air quality is really, really humid. It's much, much easier to dry off a horse, that evaporative cooling, when the air is also really, really dry. So in the wintertime, we know it's significantly more dry air. So a lot of times horses are sweating, but we're not seeing it because it's instantly drying. So I think a lot of times we miss the boat on continuing electrolyte supplementation and monitoring water intake because we just don't see them sweat, or we don't see them and we don't think, oh, they're not losing electrolytes and they're not losing moisture content. Pregnancy, 5 to 15 gallons is like a maintenance horse. But if your horse is lactating and it's really cold out, still 13 to 20 gallons of water per day is normal for a lactating animal. So we have the electroaid paste or the electroaid powder. Adding either of these to the diet will increase the electrolytes. So if they're sweating and we're not noticing it, if they're exercising, we still need to be replacing these electrolytes. And they can also increase water intake if we're concerned about that. Oops, oops. Okay, finally, the last question I get when it comes to winter feeding and do I need to change anything? If you want to put significant amounts of weight on your horse and you don't want to have the uphill battle of fighting against the cold, look, I've just told you, shoot, you might have to feed your horse 15 pounds extra of hay per day or calories per day just to maintain body weight in cold conditions. It's going to be really, really hard and to put weight on that horse as well as deal with those cold temperatures. So ideally, I want people to think about putting weight on their horses in, say, September and October before we get to those colder months. But not everybody has the luxury of doing that. So what does it actually take to put weight on a horse? We got 1,000, 1,100 pound horse. If we want to change their body condition score by 1 unit, so the body condition scoring system that we typically use in America is a 1 to 9 system, 1 being super skinny, 9 being really, really fat. So let's say we want to go from a 4 to a 5. 5 and a 6 is perfectly ideal. A 4 is usually a bit thin. A 7, we're starting to get into that overweight category, but to change one body condition score usually takes about 40 to 45 pounds of gain. How quickly can I put that 40 pounds, 40 to 50 pounds of gain on an animal? I can safely do it in about 60 days, 2 months. I know that I need an additional 10 megacals above what maintains them for every pound of gain that I want to. So over that 60 days, they're going to eat an additional 40 megacals a day, maybe even 50 megacals, not a day, in that 60-day window. So I've got to break that up over 60 days to work out how much extra I need to feed them every day. So I've got here oats and rice bran and beet pulp, alfalfa hay, and fat/oil. These are the most common ingredients that people will add to the diet in order to increase calories, right? To put weight on a horse. Based on the amount of megacals, calories per pound, in oats, rice bran, beet pulp, alfalfa hay. So oats and rice bran are very similar, 1.5 megacals per pound, beet pulp slightly less, alfalfa slightly less. Fat or oil is usually about 4.6 megacals per pound, so super, super dense. So if I'm relying on oats to give me that additional weight gain, so for 60 days, in order to get the additional calories into this horse that I know it's going to take to put 45 to 50 pounds of weight gain on him, I'm going to have to feed about 4.5 pounds of oats a day on top of what I was already feeding. Rice bran the same, beet pulp slightly more, about 5.2, alfalfa hay about 6 pounds, but oil, it works out to be just a little over 2 measuring cups will give you that weight gain. So um, now I will say that the benefits of adding additional alfalfa hay, yes, you have to feed 6 pounds a day, but you do get the heat produced from fiber digestion. When you're feeding oil, there's no that's one of the benefits to the oil is there's no heat production when you digest oil or fat. So you'll notice that performance horses that have to perform in really hot conditions, we get them used to eating large quantities of fat. So because it's not going to interfere with their thermoregulation, it's not going to make them hot. So the DAC oil is really a very easy, effective way to put significant amounts of weight gain on a horse quickly. So I usually, when I'm talking about winter feeding, I'm going to do a combination of fibers. So increase the hay quantity and quality and add oil. So with that, I will stop the recording and take any questions.